Hello, my name is Kevin Porman. I'm a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. And today we have a very special edition of codeLive. It's a little bit different. We may not actually even get around to writing a line of code today, but we're going to be asking some very important questions and working through a different kind of use case today. With me today, I have Gemma Blizzard. She is, as you'll be able to tell here in just a second, from the lovely island of the UK. I guess the UK is more than one island, but you're from, is it Great Britain? Is that the name of that island?
The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, if you want to go for the full thing.
Well, let's be formal. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. And Kevin, thank you very much for inviting me to come and join you today. I'm Gemma Blizzard. I've been working with Salesforce since 2008. I'm co-CEO of the Architect Club and founder of Ladies Be Architects. Pleased to meet you all.
Very cool. Now, we have somebody saying they're very happy to see you and that you're in the house. So you've got a fan club here in our chat today. If you have questions, comments, or snide remarks, feel free to reach out to us in the chat and post a question or comment or even that snide remark, and it'll be good to go. Today, we're going to look at a potential application. We have an idea with some user stories, and we're going to look at what we would start to do to plan out building this application from an architect's perspective. And Gemma's going to really help us understand what questions to ask, why, and to answer them. And if we need to, I can jump over and we can draw some fancy diagrams, but we're mostly going to be talking through this. Now, this came up about 7 years ago. I adopted the dog you see here. His name's Decker. We actually rescued him from underneath a deck, hence the name. And Decker had a lot of health problems. He'd had a really rough life. But my thought was, if I ever had a midlife crisis, I would leave software engineering, software advocacy, and that I would go start a dog rescue because I'm of the opinion that dogs are better than people. With that said, the idea here is we want to start looking at the questions architects ask when we start to build an application. And the application we're going to build today is based around this case study. Decker's Pack is a fictional local rescue group. They have a volunteer network of 30-ish plus foster homes, and they have an annual donors list in excess of 500 households. So they're a pretty well-established rescue organization. But they don't have any process in place to manage adoption events, foster parenting, vet records, and socialization. So they've asked a nonprofit group, or not-for-profit consulting company, to step in and help them build a solution on Salesforce to manage all of the dogs, cats, foster parents, veterinary records, socialization records, all of that stuff that comes with it. And so we've got it broken down into use cases. So the idea is, as a blank, I need to do blank so that I can blank and that everyone wins. All right. On today, again, jump in with questions, suggestions even. We're going to start off with animal intake. So the idea here is that a volunteer, or some of the volunteers, who generally have limited computer experience, need to be able to bring an animal into the system so that they can make sure they receive proper medical care, socialization, and have a foster care pack set up. And correlation to that, as the administrator of the system, we need to be able to see data to make sure that our data is clean, that it is not full of duplicates, and that the rules about animals as they come in, so we can do reports and project needs and capacities to the board of directors. So with those two sort of use cases started, Gemma, what do we do here? Like, you're the architect, what do we do?
Gosh, well, my brain is on fire already reading them both, because it's firing in so many different directions, so many things to consider in these two fantastic user stories. The whole purpose of a user story is for you to understand the actor, to understand the need or the want, and the value that they're trying to obtain, and the so that, which is the why. Why are we looking to do this, and what additional considerations do we need to bring in when we read this story? So the first thing I'm thinking is, as a volunteer, so volunteer, that's an entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think spotted that yourself because you've capitalized that actor. You've actually capitalized an actor and an animal here. So that tells me immediately that's an entity that you need to track. It also tells me that based on what I know about the animal shelter, there are dogs, cats, and and within that you've got various different breeds, subbreeds, and pedigree, mixed breeds, etc. So being able to track an animal is the first thing that I pick up, and that to me tells me that we need an animal table in the system.
I'm gonna go, just interrupt here. I'm gonna take some notes here in Visual Studio Code. I'm gonna use Markdown and so that we can sort of see a formatted version of it. Let's do this. Let's do Decker's pack, and we have entities. These are our actors, the people who are doing things. And so we've got a volunteer. And go ahead.
The interesting thing about volunteers as well is that you've potentially also got users in that space. You've got, and I suppose as well, looking at this from, if you were looking at this from a CTA review board perspective, then one of the first things you would want to do is identify which actors are involved in this as well.
All right, so back up there, you used an acronym. I'm imposing a new rule on codeLive. If you use an acronym, you have to explain it. So what is the CTA board?
So the CTA is the Certified Technical Architect certification, which is offered by Salesforce. It is the ultimate Salesforce cert. It is labor intensive to prepare for, and it's notoriously difficult to pass because obviously if you're a certified technical architect, you have proven you have advanced skills, not just in the physical and the tactical elements of building a Salesforce system, but also around business planning, adoption, and the way that all of the technical system hangs together. So as part of that, you have to pass what's known as a review board. There is a panel of your peers, other certified technical architects, who will review what you have prepared. You have 2 hours to prepare a solution for the scenario, and then you have to present it to that board. So I was thinking along the context of that, when you prepare for that scenario, for that examination, one of the first things that you need to look at is who's involved, who are the actors. And then secondly, who are the entities? And I jumped straight to the entities. So we talked about animals, but we also have volunteers. Volunteers are something that needs to be tracked. Animals are something that need to be tracked. Volunteers are also potentially actors as well.
So entities, let me back up. You said you used entities and you used, what was the other one? Actors?
Actors. So actors are people who are going to use the system. Whether that is directly or indirectly, they are people that are affected by the system that we're going to be designing here and discussing here. Whether that system is an app inside Salesforce or whether it's something that you've brought in or something you've built, it's still a system that you have to design. It's a systematic way of working, and it starts by understanding what are the roles that are involved, what are the processes, and what is the value and the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Okay, and just so you were just talking about the CTA board and identifying these things sort of out of the box. It sort of sounds like the CTA board is kind of like going and defending a PhD dissertation, and I feel like they've got a spotlight on you and that you can't see the faces behind it because they're in the dark and they're asking you, where were you on the night of the 7th? Kind of style questions. Have you done this?
I have, yes. I've attempted it once. And indeed it was, just thinking back, it was a non-profit scenario that I worked upon. So
nice.
You do get quite an array of different technical requirements that come through. They're not structured as a user story as you've presented here.
Oh.
Not in that particular way, but user stories are what we use day in, day out as we are working on Salesforce systems. So I actually see that as the best way to break these requirements down, for sure. Okay.
So what are some other things that we need to track here? Some other entities or actors that you see in this system, in this series of stories here?
So there is another actor here, and that's obviously the administrator of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're effectively doing is articulating the needs of each of those actors and what needs to be tracked.
Okay. I also wrote down the board of directors because they're going to want reporting.
So is that an assumption that you've made?
Yeah, so I have down here that they can properly report and project needs and capacities to the board.
To the board.
Board of I probably should have said board of directors.
That's okay. It makes perfect sense. When we're looking at requirements, there are sometimes we have to make assumptions, because how granular you go really does. You can go from kind of, okay, I need to track the fact that an animal has received medical care as an overall kind of scorecard, or do you want to go down to the very most granular level and be able to see what medical care they were given, exactly what medication, what was the batch number, all of the things that you like. Certainly for as a pet owner, we get them vaccinated, don't we, a lot? So they're given a card with a stamp on it, tells you what batch number it came from. All of that stuff needs to be tracked in some way. But when you're analysing, when you're getting ready to implement something like this, these are the big discussions that you have to have. Is okay, how deep do we go? How granular do we go? What's involved in doing that? What effect does that also have on your project plan? And if let's say that you're a Salesforce customer and you're implementing this yourself, then your project plan is possibly a bit more flexible. If you do need to change your requirement, or you do decide that, okay, looking at this user story, we need to go down into a bit more detail, or we need to at least have a set of governing principles that say we just want to track it at a high level, we don't want to do it at a granular level, or vice versa. All of these are huge considerations to have that affect your timeline, really. And if you're working with a Salesforce partner or a contractor, that also equally affects the cost of the project as well, and the scope of that project.
Okay, so as we look at this, I'm looking at it here and going, and I'm also kind of playing business, the side of the business here. I know that we're going to need to track medical care, and that is a sort of we need to be able to track so I'm going to put medical care, socialization,
and a proper foster care pack.
Yeah, socialization and foster care. We'll just put foster care. And when I say medical care, I actually mean things like we need to do surgeries.
Okay, so again, is this an assumption that you're making? Because assumptions as well need to be written down so that you can validate them, I guess.
It would be an assumption, except for the fact that since I'm playing the part of a business owner here, I can tell you that when I wrote down medical care, I meant we need to be able to track surgeries, like getting them fixed, and we need to be able to track vaccinations and any medical diagnoses.
Absolutely. There's diagnosis, there's treatment,
and medication.
Yeah, and clinic appointments as well. Obviously, clinical discussions that take place.
Okay. Clinic appointments. I can type.
Yeah, times when you've brought your dog when you brought Decker in to see the vet for whatever reason.
And who that vet is.
Yeah, so you're going to need to know who the vet is. Also, the outcome of that.
It appears we have some technical difficulties and we lost Gemma. Hey, there's Gemma.
Hello, I'm back. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Okay. There we go. I wrote down, and this is an assumption, I guess an assumption that we'd make, but something that I hadn't thought of until this discussion, but we're also going to need to track the veterinarians. Because while the foster, the rescue group itself probably has a group of veterinarians that they routinely deal with, if they're in foster care with foster families and they go to their own veterinarians for this kind of stuff, we're going to need to be able to track who those veterinarians are.
You've also mentioned you need to be able to properly report and project needs and capacity to the board. So you're tracking veterinarians, but then you also need to be able to look at capacity. So who's available at what point? Equally, you've got other considerations around capacity. If you need to hospitalize poor Decker for some reason, then he needs a space in the hospital.
I think we can let that happen on the vet side of things in their system.
Yeah, you see how big this can
Yeah,
grow.
no, I mean, like, this is great because we're going, I mean, down the rabbit hole here, as far as it can go. But we keep adding things and entities to track here. I just put on foster families and their capacities, and we've got all sorts of other things here. Let's look at our second user story because we got a ton of these. As the administrator of the system, I need data cleanliness tools and rules about animals as they come in, so I can properly report and project needs and capacities.
Okay, so my first question is why? You've said that you want to report and project needs and capacity, but but how does that work in the context of data cleanliness tools? So I understand that data needs to be reliable, effectively, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So in order for that data to be relied upon, and you say you need, as an admin, you say you need data cleanliness tools, that also suggests to me that you don't have those at the moment, or the data is in a bit of a poor state and cannot be relied upon. So that's when I would want to ask questions about, okay, this is obviously really important to you, otherwise you wouldn't have committed it as a user story. Tell me a little bit more about what has led to this story. Yeah,
so I actually, when I was... I thought to myself a few years back that I would do this just for fun in my spare time, and then I had kids. So before I had kids, I thought I would actually build Decker's Pack, and I actually interviewed a couple of rescue groups down where I used to live in North Carolina. And this particular user story came out of the fact that rescue group was using a Rolodex to keep track of all their dogs. They only did dogs, and they were using this Rolodex, and as they flip through, they would often find that they would find the same dog information written down, but they had the Rolodex sorted not by the name of the dog, but by the foster home they were staying in. And so if the dog, for whatever reason, switched foster homes and they didn't move the card, they just created a new one, there was all sorts of duplication issues, and what was on each card was in totally free form. And so, when I learned that about that rescue group, my thoughts were, we really need a way to make sure that we are enforcing data cleanliness about these, that there's only one record for each individual animal, and we got to find a way to say that you can't duplicate this, that sort of thing.
So you need reliable data, and you need to ensure that there is one single view of each pet.
Yep.
Each animal, and you can build up a complete picture of what has happened to that animal.
A pet 360 view, as it were.
Aha.
Yeah.
I see what you did there. But it's absolutely right. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this. You want to open up one animal, the record of Decker, and you want to see when Decker last came in. I mean, I do this all the time with my own vet, so I get quite nosy. She leaves the room, I'm like, what's on there? What kind of system have they got?
Very nice.
Got Salesforce.
Exactly.
So those notes and that clinical opinion is incredibly important to capture, but also, there is so much. You mentioned being able to properly report, project needs, project capacity, create a reliable view, avoid duplication.
Yep.
But equally, what spins off the back of that and ends up being an additional user story is around the privacy of that. I need to make sure that, yes, I'm reporting on it, I'm projecting needs and capacity to the board, but then how am I actually keeping that information private so that it is relevant? I mean, certainly from a veterinarian's perspective, it's slightly different. She's talking about animals, but there is still sensitive clinical information being gathered here, and the owners might not want it shared widely. So there's those consents and things like that to consider as well as more and more privacy laws emerge around the world.
That's a really good call. I hadn't thought about that at all. One of the things that I love about working with architects such as yourself is when you're working, just taking ideas and bringing them into a plan to build something, is you get all sorts of these other questions that you never would have thought of. And I really appreciate that. Should we go on to our next set of user stories, or do we have more to mine here?
Okay. We'll end up staying on this slide for the whole hour, I think.
So They won a grant. One of the groups that I worked with in North Carolina won a grant, and they went out and they bought 5 iPads, and they were using these mobile tablets. They wanted to use these mobile tablets as a way to say, okay, at an adoption event, they could hand the tablet over and let somebody fill out the adoption form and questionnaire, and then mark a dog as I'm interested in getting this dog or this cat, so that at the end of the day, the people at the rescue could turn around and evaluate all of that information and be like, yes, we approve you to adopt, or that's not a good idea. Be able to do that sort of approval process, as it were, based on the information. But the idea was we needed some sort of a way of getting that information into the system in a very clean way. And the idea that they had was to use these iPads. So I wrote this user story. As a volunteer with a mobile tablet, I need to be able to present an adoption form and questionnaire to potential adoptive families so that I can evaluate and approve adoptions on a case-by-case basis.
I love this one because actually it's very tempting to say, let's just build a mobile app, but you got to think about what's happening. The volunteer is holding the mobile tablet, not the user. The user doesn't need to sit and fill out that form at home from the comfort of their own armchair. So to me, that has an important licensing consideration. As you start, if you start to open up these forms externally and the control is not kept within the volunteer, because this user story suggests that the volunteer has control, they have the mobile tablet, they're going to present the form for completion. So it's actually a really important cost of ownership conversation here, because you're thinking about how do I, first of all, it's an internal facing form. On the face of it, it might be an external one because somebody else is filling it in, but the form is still owned by the animal shelter. It's not publicly transparent. It's not a public collaboration tool. So my first thought around there is to think about what tools you already have. Certainly you have Salesforce mobile app. It's optimized for iPad. You need another entity to record this adoption form. And actually I think it is worth discussing a custom object for the adoption form, because it's something that is going to be filled in multiple times across multiple customers, multiple adopters, multiple animals. So there's a strong justification for building its own object and its own entity for that adoption form.
Okay, I just added that to our entity list.
Yeah. Okay, and then and of course it gives you the added benefit of being able to open it up for an approval process. But other things to consider are who will own the adoption form, if anybody, because that will tell you if somebody does need to own an adoption form because there is some kind of business culpability for that, then actually that tells you what kind of relationship you need to have in your entity relationship diagram. Is this master detail? Is this lookup? And my next questions around that is, would you need to be able to see on a volunteer's record how many adoption forms they have worked with, how many adoption forms an animal has worked with? The answer is probably going to be no, because you're not going to get much value out of that. But I've been in meetings before where I've made that assumption in my head and gone, do you know what? There's no need for this to be master detail. But then someone's come out and said, well, actually, I need to know the volumes because our volunteers have targets. And I need to track those targets. So these are questions you want to ask.
Yeah.
To help you figure that out. This is a solution architecture question for sure.
So I'm going to put on my product owner hat here and say, as the rescue group, we don't really care to have goals or targets for what our volunteers are doing in terms of getting adoption forms filled out. We might want to track like how many adoption events a volunteer participates in, but not how many forms they get filled out or how many forms they fill out for that. And in terms of ownership of that information, like ownership of the record, the volunteers themselves who are filling out these forms when people interviewing the families and doing that work, they're not the ones who can approve or disapprove an adoption, and so it doesn't really matter who owns that record, so long as the people who are the sort of administrators or management of the shelter and rescue can access those.
I'm also thinking as well, as you were saying that, I was thinking about entities again, and you've got the actual adoption here as well. The fact that the adoption has taken place, you've got an application form that they're going to fill in, and then that application form will be evaluated and ultimately turn into an adoption. Now, an adoption could be disapproved or be unapproved. It could drop out at any moment. The parent could drop out of adopting the dog, or the shelter might decide that family's not the best. That animal's not best placed to go with that family for whatever reason. But
say the dog's a jumper and they don't have a fence.
Exactly, yeah. So for simple things like that, and what we typically talk about, this is almost like it's an opportunity in many ways. A lot of people will be screaming, it's an opportunity, but is it? But it's not really it doesn't really carry any kind of monetary value on it,
right,
unless it turns into a donations is different.
Yeah.
But ultimately there is a decision that has to be made, and it's almost an application to adopt that could affect one animal. Let's say that you meet Decker and you haven't got a fence, but actually you still really want to adopt a dog. There's other dogs, other animals that you can adopt. So and you still want to help that family. So that you could have a family that has a couple of different adoption attempts, if you like, for want of a.
So we have the idea that one adoption form information might be tied to the actual process of adopting one or more animals based on time. They may want to adopt Fido and then Spot, and because Fido was already adopted by the time they got there, and then Spot wasn't a good match, so they're going to actually adopt a cat. But none of that information about the potential adopters changes.
That's right. And I'm just thinking as well, because you've got the form and the adoption itself, they're effectively going to be one-to-one, right? Would you ever do two adoption forms for one adoption?
No.
Then there's a strong argument for you to actually combine that and use the information you're collecting on the adoption form, and that forms part of your adoption record. If it's one-to-one, then you might as well merge them if you've got a good justification.
All right, so over here in our entities list here, we've got adoption forms and adoption. When you're saying we've got an argument to combine those two?
I would say so, because you've got a one-to-one relationship, and we know that you could still have. There's not much point having it there as a second object if it's only ever going to be one object, one record in the related list.
Yeah, I wonder if though, because an adoption is so. This is getting a little ahead to how we engineer it, but I think an adoption is actually a junction object between animal and contact.
Agreed.
And the contact is where we're going to have those adoption form questions. Do you have a fence? What size is your backyard? Do you plan on taking the dog for a walk every day, or just letting them, become a giant overweight floof?
I'm going to throw a spanner in.
Yeah.
Would you have different questions for a cat versus a dog versus a calm dog versus a timid dog or a shy cat, etc.? That's when you start thinking, okay, maybe this should be two separate entities.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is we want to focus those contact related questions to be fairly generic, and then we'll have the profile on the animal, and so we can be like, do you want an energetic dog? Do you know what that means? And then we can turn around and be like, okay, you chose Spot. Spot is a Jack Russell Terrier and is going to be, very high energy, and you've said you want something fairly low energy. And so we can go back to you and be like, Spot's not a good match, but look at Bump. Bump is a Basset Hound who is very low energy and is going to be lovely for your family. And so we can kind of play matchmaker that way. But we ask the questions about the household on the contact, and then we answer questions about the animal, and we use that adoption as the junction between them. How do you feel about that?
I do think that is correct, the correct way to do that. I just started thinking about the form and what role does the form take. So yes, I agree with you. You've got other options, other objects that you can keep, other entities you can keep that information in and start to kind of match them up a bit. So yeah, I agree with you. And then you say that you want to be able to quickly and easily fill in the information as well as email yourself related information. And that's when you start thinking, okay, you're going to email yourself related information.
Well, this is as the potential adoptive parent. So,
and bearing in mind they are on the tablet and they're filling in the form that is owned by the volunteer, correct?
yeah. But, as they're at the form, they could be like, we want to adopt Spot. And then they could, but I am new to the area, and I can turn around and hit a button on that form that sends, because I'm going to provide an email address. Let's just assume I can hit a button that would then say, for your given address that you've given us, the closest 3 vets are X, Y, and Z.
Okay. So you're going to be coding at that point because you're trying to find a match.
Yeah.
And it's got to loop through the different parameters. It's got to take the parameters you've got and then loop through the rest of the data to find matching parameters and come up with 3 suggestions. At that point, you could code that, or I'd rather probably train an algorithm to do that.
Oh, say more.
I'm digging myself a hole now.
Are you saying like Einstein predictions, or
Yeah, potentially. You could look at. I would say it's worth evaluating, and bearing in mind I've not implemented that before, but and I don't know at a deeper level how capable that would be. But that's something I would want to explore.
That's really cool, though. We're going to file that away as a thing to look into here.
Yeah, put a pin in it.
put a pin in it. Shall we go to the next one?
Let's do it. Yes.
Okay. So the board puts together adoption events, and they try to do 1 or 2 every month. And we need to be able to quickly staff them with volunteers and adoptable animals so that our animals are out there meeting potential adoptive parents. Now, we can do this one of 2 ways. We either have pure volunteers, or we have some volunteers that are also foster homes. And so obviously, if we ask somebody who's a foster home parent to come volunteer at an adoption event, they're bringing their animals. So what we need to be able to do is staff an adoption event, not only with volunteers, but also adoptable animals.
Mm-hmm. In this instance, would be looking at an app. I would be going to speak to Amnon Kirby. He's one of my MVP friends. He's got an app that does this. It's called a Simio. So I would look at a Simio and see you could, for that shift management, because yes, we know Salesforce has a nonprofit success pack, but is that more than we need here? If that makes sense. Is it that we actually need something that's more of a point solution than a holistic solution to cater for that specific scheduling and staffing requirement? If we were using NPSP, then that would be taken care of. So this turns into a build not buy, or a bit buy versus build conversation, and a lot of it depends on parameters like time and cost.
Okay. Now, you said a Simio. I have that ASIMIO?
IS. It starts with an I, but you got the rest.
Okay.
Simio. Yeah, they have. It's a really good staffing tool and helps you to visually see who's where.
Great. We can look at both of those. The next one is, as a volunteer, I need a quick mobile way of confirming my availability to staff an adoption event so that my foster pets meet forever parents quickly.
Quick mobile way of confirming availability. Okay, so as a volunteer, this also assumes that you'll be using the iPad app to take adoption information anyway. But a part of that is that you can build potentially, I would look at probably using Flow for something like this to expose through the Salesforce mobile app so that they can, in a micro moment, say, yeah, I'm available this date, this time, or at least tap on a shift and say, yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, I think what I was looking for on this one, put my PO hat back on. I talked with when I was interviewing those rescue groups in North Carolina. One of the things that they wanted to be able to do is a way to be able to get a hold of their volunteers and say, are you available next Friday or next Saturday from 1 to 3 to be at XYZ place to show off your foster pets. And they were, when I got that information from them, they were very prescriptive. We need to be able to text our volunteers and ask them, and I wanted to back up and say, well, do you want to be able to have a conversation with them about it, or do you want them to be able to quickly say yes or no? And so, you know, we need, this is, I'm trying to be as unspecific as possible. Not vague, but unspecific. You know, as a volunteer, I need to be able to quickly on my phone say, yes, I'm available, or no, I'm not. So that, you know, my foster pets are getting out there.
Well, then I start having questions. What's your demographic like for your volunteers? Are they tech savvy? Are they app users? Are they texters? Are they phoners? It's important to understand your audience better.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, as I'm thinking back to the people I know who are part of pet rescues, they don't necessarily seem to be necessarily tech savvy, but they are, I mean, like,
digitally aware.
You know, they're able to FaceTime their grandkids or, you know, text someone. I don't think texting or using an app on a smartphone is a barrier. I'll put it that way.
No, and for sure. I mean, I hang around with people of all ages and demographics, and most people are generally phone literate, IT literate these days. But in those instances, I think, first of all, when someone signs up as a volunteer, I think it's really important to capture their preferences. Once you have their preferences, then you have an idea of which channels people would prefer to be contacted by. So my first thing to do there would be to look at the data. What are people saying when they're signing up to volunteer about their preferences? Email, SMS. Again, going back to that issue of privacy and consent, as more and more privacy laws emerge from around the world. Privacy law is all about, do I have your consent to hold this data for this purpose? So, and how long for, how is it going to be stored, and how will it be deleted and erased when it is no longer serving its purpose? And also, how can I as an individual control your ownership of my data? And really, that's all that privacy stuff comes down to. So it means that's why you see, what are your preferences when you sign up for I don't know, a hotel loyalty program or something like that. It will say, how do you want to be contacted? Because first of all, it's compliant, but second of all, the additional benefits of understanding that data can help you plan your processes in a way that is customer centric. Your volunteers are your customers effectively. You have to communicate with them. Even though they're providing you with a free service that helps you to meet the objectives of your nonprofit, you're still able to, you still effectively have to treat these people as if they're customers. So gathering their preferences and analysing that data, I think, is going to be really important in informing the solution that we come up with here.
Wow, that was a whole set of rabbit holes I had not ever imagined. You know, with volunteers, I didn't think about needing to get their permission to store their preferences for how they want to be contacted. But you're absolutely right. That is a fantastic bit of insight there. Let's go on to our next set of user stories here as we branch out our topics. And then when we get through these, maybe we can switch over to our notes and sort of talking, like, figuring out how we want to do this. So we need a way to keep track of basic veterinarian records related to vaccinations, surgeries, and other chronic illness treatments so that we can help potential adoptive parents understand the upfront costs of adopting from us and what it's going to look like to care for that animal going forward. And then the flip side of that is, as a volunteer, I need to be able to quickly and accurately enter those veterinary record informations for the pets that we're fostering when we're there at the vet, so that everything is up to date in the system and nobody is, you know, lost in the shuffle, as it were.
Glad you asked, because this came to my mind earlier, and I kept quiet about it. I was thinking, how are you going to track the costs of all of these treatments, the vaccinations, and so on? And this is again a piece around solution architecture, because first of all, when you're tracking things like surgeries and chronic illness treatments and vaccinations, you've got batch numbers for a lot of the drugs that are kept, because you have to be able to trace back if there are any problems and then tell the manufacturer. You then got other pieces around there as well that, again, they cost time and attention, and they cost your nonprofit. And you can recover that. You need to know how much you need to recover in donations in order to achieve the goals that you've set financially for that year. So I was thinking earlier, as we are tracking our treatments, if you like, each treatment will carry that cost. And that's going to be incredibly valuable insight to the board. So I thought about that on slide 1. And the same for the vet records, right? Because the vet treatment will cost as well. If you take your dog to the vet, you're not just paying for the vaccination, you are also paying for the vet's time and the vet's investigation time, research, scans, all of those things. They take time, and that's what carries the cost. So what you'll see in many vet surgeries is that, certainly from my experiences, Steve is my cat. So I'll take Steve in, sit him on the table. He gets examined. The vet puts the notes in, the clinical notes. They need to be there because that's from the vet's clinical opinion. But then there's also the treatments that go on as well. And that will eventually produce an invoice that I will pay. In a non-profit situation, it's hard because I don't have direct experience of that. There are some assumptions I have to make, but there is an invoice at some point, and that invoice has to be paid. And usually that will come from, I'm assuming, will that come from a vet? Will that invoice be, I know, another rabbit hole? Will that invoice carry all of the treatments across all the animals for the month, or will it be one invoice per animal per instance? And that's when you start to look at the data architecture and master data management for products.
Yeah, I think those are really super good questions. I'll tell you the answer to the way it was done at the rescue groups I worked with is they had a network of veterinarian offices that they worked with, and those veterinary offices were all owned by the same sort of parent company, and they had an agreement with that parent company so that someone could come in and show that they were part of the rescue group, and the vet would treat the animal and they would walk out without having to pay anything, and then they would send the invoice for that and the records for that instance, that visit to one instance to the actual rescue group overall. And so they had somebody who was, in this case, literally printing and putting in file folders the information about, Spot got his rabies vaccine today, or, Decker was treated for heartworm. And they would print those out and stick them in folders. It occurs to me that this is volumes, heart volumes. I'm not so sure I follow. Tell me more.
I started thinking about volumes because it's one invoice per instance. And if you see 50 pets in one day, multiply that by 262, your volumes start to rack up. So then your security and sharing becomes important. I'm assuming that those records are kept private. You then have performance to consider. Now if you're looking at what was the assumption we made? 50 times 262. I'm terrible at on the spot arithmetic. That is 13,000 invoices a year. And that's just one invoice. If you then start collecting all of the itemized pieces underneath that invoice, so let's say you've got 13,000 invoices a year, each with 5 line items.
Okay, so we're starting to spiral out of control really quickly here.
65,000 in a year, 65,000 invoice lines in a year. Is that best housed in Salesforce? Is that best housed somewhere else?
I think my answer to that, as if I were the actual shelter group, would be I want to be able to store those like PDFs of the actual invoices, but I don't think it needs to be in Salesforce. I need to be able to find it, but I do need to keep track of today's date is June 17th, and this dog got this vaccine at this location from this batch number, and it's good until this date. So like a limited subset of that knowledge needs to be there, because we need to be able to provide that to adoptive parents, saying your dog's not due for vaccines until a year and 3 months from now.
Reminders, yes. Yeah. That's something else. Yeah. That's easy enough to automate. If you're using Flow, you can put it in, you can queue up reminders to go in once, but then the invoice data has to get in there to begin with.
Okay. So we have to be able to, and this seems like a great place where we might be able to find some sort of like, I don't know, like a MuleSoft integration where we can go grab those records from the vet system naturally or directly. And that all depends on what the vet's capable of doing too. But
I mean, 65,000 invoice lines isn't a large volume. I mean, in terms of, it's just a consideration more than anything else. And it leads to that discussion about integration. It leads to that discussion about exposing information versus copying and pasting it. The style of integration is really important here. Okay. Because you've got things like your limits as well, your API limits to consider. But again, 60, if you're looking at, say, 13,000 invoices, again, it's not a very large volume. It's when you're going into the tens of millions, that's when you need to start really thinking about it. But
I love that we have different understandings of what large volumes are, because when you say 65,000, that seems like a large amount to me. And I started going, well, if I had $65,000, I'd be super happy. So, that seems like a large amount in some situations. Okay. Shall we go on to our next set of use cases?
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you.
Okay, here we're gonna take a swing to the left here, and we're gonna say we need a tax legal solution for managing, which means to reach out to and providing tax information for our donors, so that our donors feel no friction when donating to us or receiving needed tax documents from us.
Okay, so I'm a British citizen. I have no idea how US tax laws work.
As hard as the least efficient possible way is how I'm going to summarize our tax system. Okay, so we need a tax solution, and obviously we've reached out to someone who's British, so the U.S. tax solution over there is probably not great. But the idea is we need to be able to accept money, and we need to be able to provide receipts for that money at a very low level.
Okay, accept money and provide receipts. I also think as well, when you're running the data, when you're running the reports for the board, they're going to want to see amounts in that do not include tax, right? That's how these things usually get looked at.
So in the United States here, if an organization is what we call a 501c3 organization, they don't pay tax. So if I give them $500, they get to keep all $500 of it.
And
the flip side is
UK, oh, sorry, you go.
And then the flip side is the 501c3 has to provide a receipt saying, hey, they gave us a tax-free donation of $500, and then I get to write that $500 off my income tax.
Yeah, I'm with you. In the UK, we also have, for charities, it's called gift aid, whereby if you're a British taxpayer, any donation that you make, the charity or non-profit, no, charities only, the charity can reclaim a certain amount off the government on top, which is called gift aid. So if I donate £1, then the charity can claim gift aid from the government on that £1 amount that I've donated. So I just wondered if there was that to consider, anything like that in the equivalency.
No, that would make too much sense. So I think what we have over here is, the closest we have is to corporate matching. So some companies like Salesforce have a program where if I donate a certain amount of money, and there's usually limits and constraints on it, but if I donate some money to a charity or a nonprofit that it qualifies, a company may come in and match that or match a certain percentage of it and write them a check as well.
In which case, I know that the Nonprofit Success Pack, NPSP, which is provided by Salesforce, actually has a donation matching feature held within it, which may be more useful in this instance. Again, there's a strong case building here for installing NPSP, saving yourself some time, getting to know it, and actually building up because it handles the volunteers, it handles the volunteer shifts, it handles the donation side and the matching and all of that. What it doesn't really handle is tracking the animals and the medical stuff. You would have to build that yourself to extend the Nonprofit Success Pack, or go to the App Exchange and see where other people have done it, and evaluate some of those. But
that seems like a great way to get a leg up. If we have to look at it and say, if we install the NPSP and then we only need to worry about animal management, veterinary records management, that sort of stuff. Then all the stuff about donor management, all the stuff about scheduling, all that, we don't have to build that. We've effectively bought
So
it.
yeah,
And so, we're going to get to I refer to it as the first time to joy. Our first time to joy shrinks. We'll be able to have those people running the shelters and rescue groups going, okay, this is great. This has made my life easier sooner.
the consideration is data migration. If everything is held in a card Rolodex, like you mentioned earlier, then you're going to be migrating data for quite a while. You're going to have somebody out there putting it in.
That's true. Maybe we can hire some high school students who are tech savvy to put that in place.
I'm sure they'd love the experience. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, let's go to our next one here. They would like an interactive portal capable of displaying information about upcoming events, animals available for adoption, online donations, and the sharing of pictures and stories, so that they can foster an online community / family of our donors and adoptive parents.
When you got halfway through that, I was about to say, but why? What's the point? And then you said, we'll foster an online community. Because at first, sometimes it's easy to read a user story and assume that you're being presented with a solution rather than a problem. But when you talk about online communities, you're talking about a whole business concept in itself, which comes with its own unique sets of benefits. I mean, look at Salesforce. Salesforce for me is pretty exemplary as far as building communities goes. We run around wearing stuff with Salesforce characters on it. I've got a big bag full of stickers here. No one really does community better than Salesforce from what I've seen. So it's clear to see from us who live it day in, day out what those benefits are. But it's, as an architect, you need to be able to articulate to a non-profit shelter that may not have experience of building an online community or see the benefits up front, because it can be quite expensive. It is quite expensive to license an online community. And the other considerations are behaviors and a culture around that community. What moderation is it going to require? What are the rules going to be? How will you enforce those rules? How will you encourage people to participate? How will you allow and save money in serving your volunteers, in serving your families and your communities in a way that effectively allows that community to build itself without you having to intervene all the time? The best communities are ones that manage themselves, where people are answering each other's questions, but they are doing it within moderation, if that makes sense. So it's more of a business. It's a simple requirement and a simple technical solution, but the detail is not just around setting up the community. We know it can take us 2 hours to set up a community in Salesforce. It's all of the how and the behavior and the rules and how do you drive that community towards the outcomes that you want to push, but equally, how do you then act upon the feedback that you're given by that community, and what features do you enable that community to complete in such a way that is going to save you money? As a non-profit, that is essential that it saves you money.
So listening to what you just said, I don't have answers to those questions, and I don't even know where to start with that. And I think if somebody came to me with those, in light of those questions, I would be like, this should be phase 2, and you should go and you should really look into how you want to drive that behavior and what can you do to drive that behavior and those sorts of things as we build phase 1.
See, I see it the other way around. I see it as a prep and readiness stage where you get some focus groups together and actually spend time understanding what your people would want to get from being in part of that community. What do they get? Because with anything outward facing, same with when you're selling to a customer, it's always about the what's in it for me. What do I get out of this? And we know what you will get out of this as the animal rescue home, but what will all the families and so on get from it? Will they get dog tips? Will they get handy vet videos about avoiding lungworm? Will they get videos about how to groom a Persian cat and get the mats out of its fur and things like that? Or will they be able to book an appointment through that community? So I actually think that the implementation is kind of the phase 2.
Okay.
The phase 1 is the readiness and the understanding what you're going to put in and building the rules and the moderation around it. That's just my view.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, we got one more slide here of these. We need a way to organize puppy play dates at the local bark parks so that our rescues become and remain well socialized.
This is just the cutest thing. Like, I've never heard of a bark park.
Oh, yeah?
Never.
Oh, so they, we have, depending on where I've lived, they go by different names. When I was in North Carolina, it was always the dog park or the off-leash dog park. They've got, like, you go there and they've got, like, it's usually like a 10-foot, it's a really tall fence, and it's big and they can all run around and you can chuck balls and they run after the balls and bring them back and chase each other around. And then off in one corner, there's usually like the place for the dogs that are the size of cats and aren't really sure they're dogs, but are kind of more like cats. And they run around but they're off on their own, so they don't get trampled by the big ones. And then down, when I moved here to Indiana, they call them bark parks.
That is the cutest thing. So we don't have that here, certainly where I live, and I've not really seen it before. I'm sure that there are places in the UK that have them. I think it's a wonderful idea. I was just imagining my little Sally, who is a mixture of Chihuahua and Shih Tzu and Pomeranian and Pug and Jack Russell Terrier, and she's completely bonkers. I can just imagine her running around that bark park. Puppy play dates, again, you could put that into your community. That's something we were talking about, is being able to, first of all, there's organizing them, which is a task and a feat in itself. But then there is also the, getting people to sign up for it. Are you going to take payments for it?
No.
That's a question. No payments, completely free. Yep.
Yeah.
And the socialization, you mentioned earlier, being able to report on socialization for dogs. So, but equally, there's some fantastic insights and marketing opportunities here as well. If you're running a social event, then that needs to be promoted, right? But then there's also there's that tracking of, because the more your charity is, your nonprofit is, the more exposure it gains, the more adoptions you'll have, the more families you'll have, the more people in the community. You've got that growth all the time. And being able to track all of the socialization activities, be it a puppy play date or be it, a birthday party, a doggy birthday party. Oh my God, can you imagine? And
I'm just imagining a Jack Russell Terrier running around with a little pointy hat with the pom-pom on top.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, she doesn't look like that. She looks like a little Simba. She's absolutely crazy, and I love her to pieces. But just imagining her running around, going crazy at all the other dogs, you'll need a place it would be good to track that, because then I know that, if Sally came along to the little dog's play date, we can record, like, did she socialize well with the other dogs, or was there an issue, etc., so that you can then provide additional resource and support for that family. Especially if you are, dog tips, training tips, breed tips, how to discourage your dog from jumping up at you and things like that might be helpful. I know that's quite granular detail, but you've got volunteers there with iPads, haven't you, Kevin? So it's, and the families are going to be hopefully keeping an eye on their dogs. So being able to collect some kind of report, or if they're in a community, give them a quick survey. How did that go? You've got valuable marketing insights there that you could include in a nurture journey. Let's say you're using Pardot and you layered Pardot over the top and you wanted to target different families with different breeds of dog. Let's say you're having a golden retriever day, or a Rottweiler appreciation week, etc. Then you've got those valuable insights, and you can actually include those families on different nurture tracks. Sorry, I was such a visual.
No. This is great. This is great. Unfortunately, though, we have hit our time limit for the day. So I want to thank you, Gemma, for joining us and for walking us through asking all these different questions. Oh, look at that! Look, I don't get Simba though.
Well, she's quite small. When you pick her up, you can very much do Circle of Life.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I
Mhm.
can't do that. My dogs are all like 55 pounds. They're a little too heavy for Circle of Life. Or maybe I'm just a little too weak to do the Circle of Life. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you all have enjoyed this slightly different codeLive, where we talk through a project from the architect's perspective. I've learned a lot here, and I hope you have too. I would love to see you all leave questions, comments in the YouTube feedback section. If you liked this, go ahead and hit subscribe, and so you can be told when we're going to go live again. Hint, it's Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you much.